Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we are asking the question: how powerful was the Catholic Church in the medieval period? During the early Middle Ages, Christianity, and specifically Catholicism, acquired a new incisive and decisive dimension, which would allow the Church to exercise immense power. If already in the late Roman era, with figures such as Constantine and Theodosius, the political potential of Christianity had been explored, and it had progressively established itself until becoming the official religion of the empire, in the early Middle Ages, the role of the Christian religion became essential for the realities of Central Western Europe, which were politically, socially, and culturally taking shape and political form. However, before diving into the actual historical data, as we always do in these video analyses, since this video is about power, I would like to first define the meaning of the word in a historical and geopolitical context. To define power in a historical context requires a nuanced understanding of various forms of influence, control, and authority. At its core, power represents the capacity to effect change, shape outcomes, and direct the behavior of individuals or groups within any given societal framework. However, in order to define power properly within history, we also have to discuss its multifaceted nature within governance. Power, in its myriad of manifestations throughout history and within government structures, transcends simplistic definitions and demands a more profound analysis. Regardless, for the purposes of this video, let's just say this. At its essence, power can be conceptualized as the ability to exert influence, enforce will, and orchestrate outcomes within a complex web of social, political, military, and economic relationships. Clearly, this rudimentary understanding belies the intricate tapestry of power dynamics that have shaped human civilization and continue to mold the outcomes of modern governance. So, let's just step up the depth of the definition a bit more. Within the historical realm, power has often been synonymous with the capacity for coercion and the monopolization of violence. In other words, the ability to marshal military forces, subjugate populations, and extend territorial control that has been a hallmark of powerful entities throughout the ages. Yet, this martial perspective represents merely one facet of a multidimensional concept. Equally significant have been the power derived from economic dominance, technological superiority, cultural hegemony. The great empires of antiquity and the colonial powers of more recent centuries exemplify how the confluence of these various forms of power can create enduring spheres of influence that juxtapose with each other. Moreover, within the governmental sphere itself, whether it be ecclesiastical or whether it be secular, power also gains additional layers. We all know that a state possesses a monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory, which remains a foundation principle. It encompasses the ability to legislate, regulate, and adjudicate, to collect and allocate resources, to shape public discourse and national narratives, not to mention the ability to extend its power within the international stage and foreign policy. And to further understand the way power has been maintained and justified, I would refer you to my recent video on propaganda, link in the description. The power of a governing body is thus measured not only by its capacity for coercion, but also by its ability to generate consent, foster social cohesion, and navigate the intricate dimension of domestic and international politics. Now, given all of these definitions do not give justice to all of the different paradigms of power dynamics, but they will suffice as a foundation for this video. From the 8th to the 10th century, the kingdoms of Central Western Europe suffered raids from all sorts of new barbarian invasions carried out by various populations from Northern Europe and the steppes of Central Asia. Under these pressures, both the political entities that had benefited in their genesis from a direct contribution of Roman culture, such as for example the Romano-barbarian kingdoms of the continent, and those that had assimilated it mainly through the church, such as the kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy, continued to cultivate the classical idea of a civilized world with which they obviously identified, as opposed to an uncultured northeastern barbaricum. In other words, the Christian kingdoms of early medieval Europe found themselves in a very uncomfortable position of being, if not from an ideal point of view, at least from a factual standpoint. Largely, they were a product of the same barbaricum, which was now perceived as backward, hostile, and above all, different from themselves. It was precisely the ancestral belonging to the same cultural milieu that now produced new hordes of plunderers, against which it was imperative to oppose oneself to protect one's stability. This led European kingdoms to seek a criterion that would draw a clear line of demarcation, an unequivocal us and them. If the difference in customs and habits between a subject of the Carolingian Empire and a Saxon from Westphalia, between an inhabitant of one of the Heptarchy kingdoms and a Dane, could be decidedly subtle, the clearly divergent element could be recognized mainly, if not exclusively, in the sacred sphere. Belonging or not to the Christian universe in the Middle Ages became the new criterion of separation between the civilized world and the barbarians. In other words, this mirrored or functioned in a similar way to how the Roman world, as it was expanding, would require a certain level of Romanization and adoptance of Roman values as the basis of entrance within the empire. So too did the Christian kingdoms of early medieval Europe require this on a confessional basis, both from their subjects and from those realities with which they wanted to build a prolonged and productive dialogue. Within this very specific and peculiar cultural and socio-political climate, the representative collegial structure of Christianity at the time, namely the Church, thus progressively acquired immense power, because as the medium and interpreter of the divine message, it was also the one who decided who, both individually and collectively, could be part of the Christian universe. But in order to thoroughly appreciate how much, really, actual power the Church held in the early Middle Ages, we need to look no further than one of the most iconic moments in Church history, the coronation of Charlemagne in 800 AD, on the Christmas Mass of the 25th of December. Taking advantage of a moment of weakness of the Byzantine Empire, at the time ruled by a woman, Empress Irene, Charlemagne had himself crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III. It is the Church, therefore, with its religious authority that reflects in the political sphere, that legitimizes a title which increases the prestige in this very moment in history. It is therefore the Church, with its religious authority, that reflects in the political sphere, that legitimizes a title which increases the prestige of Frankish monarchs compared to the Byzantine ones. Now, this is a very significant moment within the European medieval scenario because it shows how much the involvement of the Church was in fact beneficial to Charlemagne. With that being said, conceding that level of power will have its price. It is from this specific historical event that the relationship between secular power and ecclesiastical power will become incrementally more intricate, and monarchs will perceive ecclesiastical power both as an element to rely on and something to be wary of. A striking example of this dichotomy is the strategy used by Emperor Otto I of the Holy Roman Empire from 962 to 973 AD. To limit the power of aristocrats, Otto I decided to establish a figure called the Bishop Counts, recognizing political power to bishops of large cities. This was done in order to limit the power of aristocrats, as he would be offering the bishops lands, farms, and settlements to administer instead of lay aristocrats in exchange for an oath of loyalty. Now, Emperor Otto I's design was ingenious. The reason being is that it had multiple objectives. Bishops are perceived by the common people as representatives of a spiritual power with sacred prerogatives, and thus less likely to be the object of discontent and rebellions. Since bishops could not have children upon their death, the counties assigned to them returned to the emperor, who entrusted them again to people of his trust, eliminating the risk of hereditary political offices at the expense of the crown's power. Being appointed by the emperor, the bishop counts are evidently grateful to him for the benefits obtained and owe him loyalty. This undermines the power of the pope and the church, which, moreover, are in fact infiltrated with what are potentially agents of the emperor. The appointment of bishop counts became one of the major reasons for conflict between the papacy and the empire, and is usually referred to as the investiture controversy. You see, the pope did not intend to give up his faculty to appoint bishops and abbots, while the emperor did not want the pontiff to decide who should administer imperial territories. All in all, the investiture controversy reflected a much bigger problem, establishing whether the pope's power was superior to that of the emperor, or vice versa. To protect himself from papal power, Otto I also promulgated the so-called privilegium Ottonis, in ecclesiastical Latin pronunciation, a provision according to which papal elections could only take place with the emperor's consent. Since the pope, a Christ vicar, legitimizes the emperor's role, Otto I wants to ensure that in turn the emperor ratifies the pope's appointment, to limit his political weight as a kingmaker. Otto's various attempts to extend lay power control over the church led to an open conflict between the empire and the papacy, which saw the church go through a period of reform and restructuring with the aim of freeing itself from the empire's conditioning and strengthening the papacy's autonomy. In 1059, Pope Nicholas II convened a council in which he established the annulment of the privilegium Ottonis, decreeing that the election of the pontiff had to take place without impositions from the emperor, and his successor, Pope Gregory VII, reacted to the empire's interference by issuing, in 1075, the Dictatus pape, a provision that established the superiority of the Pope and attributed to him alone the power to appoint bishops and abbots. On top of that, and this is the strongest one, the Dictatus Papae also gave the right to the Pope to depose emperors. And you thought, oh, modern influencers and their drama always after each other's throat. Welcome to history. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much. Emperor Henry IV attempted to contain the church's reform, moving autonomously in appointing bishop in Italy, blatantly ignoring the pontiff's will, leading to an escalation with dire consequences. Gregory VII reacted to Henry's interference by reprimanding the emperor in a missive, but the latter in response convened a synod in Worms where, with the support of bishops loyal to him, he questions Gregory's legitimacy as pope. Gregory VII then, in turn, excommunicated the emperor. A period of increasingly bitter opposition between state and church followed, interspersed with fragile moments of reconciliation, such as the one that saw Henry IV, penitent, imploring papal forgiveness for 3 days and 3 nights, kneeling in the snow and wrapped in a sackcloth, he said, covered in ashes, in front of the fortress of Canossa. Now let's play a little game. Imagine that you have now 2 groups. You have bishops and you have lay nobles. If I were to ask you who do you think supported who, what would be your answer? Well, normally you would assume that the bishops supported the Pope and the lay noblemen supported the emperor. But the reality is that it was the exact opposite. The reason for that is that, first of all, the bishops really liked all of the privileges and lands that they were getting from the crown, therefore supporting the emperor. On the other hand, though, lay noblemen actually didn't like the fact that the emperor was always trying to limit their authority and considered this possibility, this conflict between the papacy and the emperor, as an opportunity to regain autonomy and power and discredit the emperor. I know, right? Roughly, in the same period that saw the beginning of the investiture controversy, we witnessed the first declaration of a crusade by a pope. This is by no coincidence. On the 27th of November 1095, Pope Urban II convened the Council of Clermont and with an impassioned speech launched an appeal, later spread throughout Europe. The Pope's speech, although it alluded to the difficulties and vexations suffered by pilgrims going to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, at the hands of the Seljuk Turks, does not seem to have made explicit reference to the conquest of the city, but rather to the need to bring aid to Eastern Christians. In fact, the Pope's appeal was a response to the request for help made by Alexios I, Komnenos, Emperor of Byzantium, who saw himself seriously threatened by the Turks. But here is the crux of the matter. In exchange for the Pope's help, Alexios I had promised to work to reunite the Eastern Church with the Roman Church, which had definitively separated with the Great Schism of 1054, and to ensure that the Orthodox patriarchs recognized papal authority. In fact, we could say that the aim of the First Crusade was to further extend the political and religious power of the Church of Rome, which makes sense in the context of the great tensions with the Empire, to show the Emperor what the maximum consequences of the Pope's influence and wrath could be. It was therefore also a demonstration of military power. We can also see this in the words used by Urban II. He says, "If you come, you will receive the just reward in the highest of heavens. If you do not come, God's punishment will fall upon you." Evidently, leveraging his position as head of the church, he started gathering participants, including non-combatants, which reached approximately 100,000 units, divided between the armies of the Norman kingdoms of southern Italy and the various powers that made up the Kingdom of France. The turbulent period of the investiture controversy finally ended with the Concordat of Worms in 1122, sanctioned between Pope Calixtus II and Emperor Henry V. The Concordat of Worms established the Pope's authority to appoint and elect bishops, and guaranteed the emperor the ability to participate in the election, entrust the newly elected with a fief, and elect them as counts, thus inaugurating a collaboration between the two realities. The investiture controversy had further highlighted the power of the Church, which, being able to depose sovereigns of their divine legitimacy, was also able to destabilize their position within the feudal system. The clear division of prerogatives dictated by the Concordat of Worms allows an autonomous reorganization of the Church, which, no longer fearing certain interferences from secular power, strengthens itself, becoming a catalyzing pole of Western Christianity. Now, there will be moments in which the hostilities will reopen again, for example between Frederick Barbarossa and Pope Alexander III, or Philip the Fair and Pope Boniface VIII. But, substantially from this moment on, a clear division is outlined, where temporal power, which finds its justification in the ecclesiastical one, had the task of defending the Church and administering justice. In this perspective, the Church increasingly defines itself as an autonomous reality, and as a representative of all the faithful in a framework that is favored by the fragmentation of political power in Europe. This will see the rise of various kingdoms and powers alternative to the Holy Roman Empire. It is within this specific context that a series of privileges within the clergy proper will begin to crystallize. For example, tax exemption, immunity from justice and courts, and the immunity enjoyed by church structures. In other words, the so-called right of asylum. You don't fight within a church. You probably heard that one. A further progression of church power occurs with Innocent III, elected in 1198, who lays the foundation for the Pope to exercise a more subtle power over monarchies and less in a direct contrast. He does not in fact question that kings, like the Pope, receive their power directly from God, but it is up to the Pope to resolve those problems that secular authorities cannot solve, namely conflicts between kings. The strong competitive relationships between the emerging political powers following the disintegration of the Holy Roman Empire and the emergence of new realities made a higher instance of judgment necessary, and thus the papacy essentially ends up acting as a sort of UN, if you will, with the additional leverage of religion. This is where the concept of the Pope as arbiter mundi, judge of the world, is born.